So this speech, some of you may have read, we did cover it once in one of our sessions, but I really want to focus on it a lot more. This was the speech she gave at a ceremony that was at the Cheon when we were in Korea this April, and it was unveiling a new part of the building. And the Cheon is the kind of like Heavenly Parents' dwelling place. It's going to have, all sorts of amazing experiences to learn about Heavenly Parent and true parents and really moving people's hearts. I know right now in DC, we have the history team from Korea who's traveled here, and they're collecting all these, artifacts and these stories and interviewing people and trying to prepare for some of that content that will be in the museum. But this particular speech, Mother gave right before she sent us to go through this workshop that she had prepared for us. And so maybe the good context to understand is we originally thought we were going to go through a few days of hearing lectures, presentations from around the region about what's happening, success stories and things like that. And then Mother suddenly changed the whole schedule and said, no, you guys need to go through this workshop. And so this talk in particular frames the content that we learned and her heart and what she's thinking about really well. And so I think it's very good to study. And, when this announcement came for me, I had to really think, okay, why is Mother changing the schedule so suddenly? We had no information about it when we did join the schedule. We just rolled out and just sat there and did whatever they told us to do. But clearly Mother thought this was so important that something needed to change. And I think this speech kind of hints at what that is and what she's thinking and what we need to work on, not just for the sake of that workshop, but I think as a movement, what do we need to be working to understand? So I titled it, it's her reflection and her direction from the Providence, because I think when she's speaking in this talk, she's looking back at what has happened, and she's also looking forward at what needs to happen, which is pretty exciting to connect with. Okay, so imagine the scene. We're in the Gung, everybody's outside, and she says, "Isn't it a beautiful day? Do you now have a sense of what this sanctum will look like? This is a historic day, not only in history, but also in the course of heaven's providence, on which the temple where our Heavenly Parent can be attended on earth has been established." And I want to pause here because, to be honest, when we're unveiling a new building and it's a new part of the building that we've been working on a long time, I have my snarky response of okay, another huge building at Cheon that I don't know what it is. It's a Korean name. What does that mean? I go through all of that. But I think what Mother is really, this building really means something to her. And so if I can come from that perspective, I approach it differently. And I say to myself, why is this building so important to her? And the theme that keeps coming back is that this is the place where Heavenly Parent can finally be attended, and that there has been no building in all of history that has been for Heavenly Parent in the truest image of Heavenly Parent, the complete image of Heavenly Parent. We have a lot of different religious buildings, but that's a certain narrow view of who God is. And so I think of Mother as a daughter. What can she do to really make her Heavenly Parent feel settled and welcome here on earth? That this is part of her offering, is to make this space for Heavenly Parent. So as we think about the effort invested, the pain and the waiting that Heavenly Parent endured throughout the past 6,000 years, a period marked with indescribable emotions of joy and sorrow, the appearance of true parents after 6,000 years among humankind on the Korean Peninsula is a day of blessing, gratitude, congratulations, and celebration as people from all nations, including Korea, can now become Heavenly Parents' children through true parents. I just noticed that's a giant sentence. So there's a lot to unpack there. But I think even looking at the first line, that Mother is looking at history here, and the words that come across, right, are in the effort invested, the pain, and the waiting that Heavenly Parent endured. And so there's already this feeling of Mother looking back at history and seeing that it hasn't been easy, that the providence of restoration has really been difficult. And it's a different tone from maybe what we're used to, of like, needing to understand God's suffering heart. There's like this, it's a different tone of the part of Heavenly Parent that has just really never given up, the emotions of joy and sorrow. And 6,000 years is mentioned twice in this time, and we hear those kinds, that time frame a lot, but I really have to think for myself, like 6,000 years, how much has God endured? How hard has God been working and never given up? I feel frustrated in my mission sometimes, and I like take space and I do my stuff and work on things and then get back at it. But God has been doing this level of work for 6,000 years. It really compels this Hyojung heart, this heart of filial piety. And Mother is celebrating who true parents are, that finally true parents came. But as we continue on, you'll see that it really hasn't been easy also. And we need to look at what has happened during true parents' life to understand it more, and know where we need to go from there. So the advent of true parents occurred on the 16th day of the 3rd month by the lunar calendar in 1960. For God, however, sending the true parents was very painful, as it was like leaving his children on the bank of a river where they might fall in, and he could not take his eyes off them for even a moment. True parents have spent the last 60 years in such an environment. Yeah, this particular section, trying to visualize like the analogy that's been given here by True Mother, that it was like leaving his children on the bank of a river where they might fall in. And I can't imagine, when I send my kids somewhere, I'm always super nervous for them, even when like the first time they get on the bus, and I'm like trying to protect them and prepare them for everything. And I think as a mom, I could not allow my children freely to just go to such a difficult situation, because it's so painful to put your child in a situation where they're going to suffer, it's going to be really difficult for them. And that's the heart that God has towards true parents here, leaving them on the bank of a river where they might fall in, their children, where they could drown, where they could be trampled. It's that kind of desperate heart. And this is the environment that true parents have been working in the last 60 years. It's not this, victorious, glorious environment, but it's been this situation where they've been on the bank of a river this whole time, teetering on the edge, and God's watching, very precisely everything that happens, knowing that at any moment they could be, pushed into the river. As a result, I am deeply sorry and apologetic to Heavenly Parent. Considering that Heavenly Parent had worked for thousands of years to embrace humanity as his children, the 60 years spent in such an unsupported environment may seem a long time, for from the perspective of his providence, it may also be considered short. However, the human body has limitations, and since the long-awaited dream of our Heavenly Parent can only be realized through true parents, I apologize to heaven that it has taken so long. And what I'm struck by here, probably all of you are as well, is Mother apologizes twice here to heaven and to God, that she's deeply sorry and apologetic to Heavenly Parent. And I apologize to heaven that it has taken so long. And so Mother's kind of like, the energy is a little bit lamenting, looking at the last 60 years, also the last 6,000 years. But it feels like in particular, this time that she's looking back where true parents have been working, she's apologizing that things haven't moved quick enough, haven't changed quick enough. And I try to put it in the context of Mother knowing that, she's at a certain age and soon enough that she will pass into spirit world. And, the content that we received in Korea also was about the Cheon Constitution and how things are going to be structured after Mother passes. And so clearly Mother is trying to think practically what's going to happen in 10 years or so, or whatever it is, when Mother has passed. And she's thinking like, wow, I only have this much time on earth. What do I need to do now? What do I need to say now so things move smoothly and move quickly? And what are the pieces that are still not quite in place yet? She experienced the transition from father's passing into her leadership and how difficult that was for our movement, all the questions that came up, the questions that are still coming up about mother's leadership. And she experienced that personally. So I think she also was realizing there's a lot to talk about and think about that needs to be prepared so the transition is smooth afterwards. But I think she's also lamenting that more hasn't been accomplished and more hasn't been revealed in the time that true parents have been on earth. And it's, it's an interesting energy from mothers, an interesting thought process that it feels vulnerable. It feels like a very sincere, and maybe she's exposing a part of her heart that we don't often see. But it is this like sadness and lamentation about how the providence has gone so far. And now she says just 1 year remains. And this topic came up a lot while we were in Korea, that we have 1 year and there's some important landmark that's happening. First of all, that landmark is when the Cheon Gung will be fully complete, May 5th, 2023, that it'll be fully complete. And we'll have some, great program and everybody will be invited. But there's more to that. A lot got attached to this 1 year and what needs to happen in this 1 year. And so it feels urgent. It feels like mother is sensing a lot needs to happen in the next year. And perhaps that's the reason why she changed the schedule of the Cheongguk leaders meeting, because she feels we need to move much more quickly. Something really has to change because heaven is working on something in 1 year's time. She says, you who are gathered here are the leaders and senior members of the Unification Church. You must properly understand the truth about heaven's providence. Therefore, through a 2-day workshop for all of you leaders, there is content you must understand and thus be able to take responsibility for, and everything with regard to True Parents Advent can be settled from the standpoint that we must welcome May 5th, 2023, a time of new beginning. And this is very interesting because she says you must properly understand the truth of heaven's providence. She says there's content you must understand and thus be able to take responsibility for. And, certainly you could read that and say, yes, I always need to understand more. I always need to grow more. But what comes across to me, and based on, some of the content we received in Korea, there's the sense that the truth of the providence, the truth of heaven's providence still has not been fully understood. And that even in True Parents' 60-year ministry, there's still pieces of it that need to be understood more deeply. It makes you think about in the time of Jesus that people, thought they understood who he was and why he came, but there was clearly such a gap between Jesus and his followers that, they couldn't protect him. They couldn't stay awake at the Garden of Gethsemane. People betrayed him. His family didn't understand him. There was such a gap between Jesus and his followers. And I like to think that there's not such a gap between me and True Parents, understanding really like the heart of their hearts and what they're thinking. But when I read this and when I reflect a little bit, I realize there's probably so much more that they have not been able to reveal to us, because we're still working on a lot of things and we can be quite dysfunctional. And we have, every member has their own opinion about mother's leadership and father's leadership. And we shouldn't be a church, we should be a movement, we should be a federation. Like every member has their opinion about what they think is the right way forward. Even True Parents' children have their different opinions of the right way forward. But it tells me that if that's the case, we're not really one in heart with True Parents. We don't really understand what's in their minds, what's in their hearts. And, Father repeated himself many times in speeches, right? And Mother too, she speaks quite simply and asks questions like, do you understand? Because I think she doesn't feel like we actually get what she's talking about. So that's why when I'm reading Mother's speeches now, I'm trying to say every sentence. Why did she say that exact sentence? And why did the translation team interpret this in a certain way? You have to trust that, right? It's all coming through translation. But I just get the sense that there's more that we need to take responsibility for. and that some shift, some change is happening and needs to happen in the next year for the sake of heaven's providence. When I connect with it, I can feel like the energy and the vibration is shifting. And the more we can shift in our heart and our understanding, the more that energy can also, manifest in the way that it wants to manifest. May 5th, 2023. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, it has been more than 2 years since you were able to come to your home country, Korea, hasn't it? You have missed Korea and wanted to see me very much, haven't you? Please see me a lot. I'll say a few words at the luncheon later. Our lives on earth must be free of shadows. Everything that could cast a shadow must be thrown out. Our appearance when we ascend to heaven must be clearer than that of a crystal. Perhaps some of our members have experienced this. First of all, Mother is always so cute and sweet, right? When she talks to people and says things, please see me a lot. I think that's her motherly nature, trying to like win people's hearts and open their hearts and remember, this is your mother that you're attending, have this kind of heart. But she gives a lot of hints here about these key words. Our lives on earth must be free of shadows. Anything that can cast a shadow must be thrown out. And our appearance when we go to heaven must be clearer than that of a crystal. This is kind of a lot of the theming of the content that the lecturer gave to us in Korea. Mother didn't give us lectures, she just spoke to us a few times, but she asked the lecturer to give some content. And there is the feeling of needing to address the shadows of our movement. And particularly, when Mother spoke, she talked about, there was another speech that wasn't officially translated and released, but the heart of Mother's speech was, she asked, like, do you love Father? She's asking us to remember how much we love Father, and she's expressing her own love for Father and saying, I'm worried about Father in heaven, right? I get the feeling that he needs to be liberated, and we as disciples of true parents and as blessed families need to really free Father so he can be free in spirit world. And that was the energy that came across. And so when you pair that with this kind of content, you start to see that Mother is looking at the history of our movement and all the things that have happened, and reflecting towards the end of her physical life that not everything has been perfect, and that we need to recognize those things, and we need to be free of shadows. And that's not easy. That's not easy for me personally. That's not easy for my family, but on a providential level, that is much more complicated, because there's always fear and doubt that surface in those kinds of environments. But the theming of like free of shadows and clear as crystal was this constant theme that in the next year, that's what needs to happen. We need to eradicate the shadows. We need to free ourselves and be totally clear, totally reborn in some sense. That was kind of the energy that would come across. If there are any shadows in the 60-year history of the Unification Church, we need to eradicate them and move on. That's a big one. I think that Mother says this, right? She's looking at the 60-year history of our church, and we need to eradicate the shadows that have happened. It doesn't mean ignore them. There's the feeling of needing to like bring them to the surface so that they can truly be removed and uprooted from our culture. And I think we as young women, we know our movement is not perfect. We know that a lot has happened, even on a local level and on a providential level. And all of us have friends who have distanced themselves or left because of those reasons, which are valid reasons. They haven't been able to overcome those difficult situations. But I get the feeling that Mother, like a mom, is making a space to have those conversations. She's making the space to recognize the imperfections, and not with judgment, not with, any accusation, but bringing them to the surface so there can be liberation, there can be freedom, there can be relief. And because of that process, being able to move forward more peacefully. And so she talks about the dates of the workshop will be the 19th and 20th at the Chunshim Chunbo Training Center. And then she calls to the leaders and says, I hope that you will put everything aside and be newly reborn as individuals, families, and churches. And, these are the kinds of sentences that you just breeze by and you don't take it seriously. But really, this energy of being reborn, that's what Mother is asking us to do right now. She's not just saying it because it's a nice, inspiring thing to say, but she's literally asking us to be reborn, to be transformed right now. And in what way? I think that's up to us in our relationship with God and studying True Mother's words. But clearly, she's feeling we need to be changed right now. And then she says, from here in the shade, I'm gazing upon you sitting in the sunlight, and you look even more beautiful than daffodils. Mother always has very cute ways to end her speeches, which you can't help but just smile at them. And I mean, it's you can even take that and go a little bit deeper. We know how much Mother loves daffodils, right? That they are the first flower in spring that comes through the icy frost, and what that means on an internal analogous level. But she's even saying to us that we're more beautiful than daffodils because internally we are the same, and we can do even further than daffodils, that we can be reborn and changed and poke through the frozen ground through our transformation of heart and become these beautiful flowers. So yeah, I think maybe what I'll end with there, because I think that's the end. Yeah. This particular speech is very interesting to me because she lays the groundwork for what some of the content that we were receiving in Korea. And that content was, who True Mother is and what her role is, and understanding the significance of being the first only begotten daughter versus a returning, inheriting that messiahship mission. And then also receiving content about the Cheon Constitution, the future of the movement and how that will be organized. And, perhaps next week we could study that a little bit. I think some of that content could be studied, especially the Cheon Constitution is quite interesting. It's very intellectual, but it's quite interesting to think about how things will be structured. And there is kind of a checks and balances system that is being developed. So yeah, maybe we'll study that a little bit together. But just the feeling of Mother sensing there's an urgency in the providence, and our heart to respond to that, I think is very important. Figuring out there's no one answer, right? Mother doesn't give everything in her speeches, but I think through our prayer and through our sincere offering and devotion, we can come to our own conclusions, and we have our unique portions of responsibilities to play there. Yeah, so I'll end it there, and then maybe we can have a little bit of a discussion about these points together.